The Holy Gospel this morning comes from St. Mark in the 8th chapter. Well, Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist." And others said Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets. Well, he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. And then he began to teach that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days, rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples, and he said to them, "If any want to be my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in his glory of his Father with the holy angels." The gospel of our Lord. You may be seated. There is one thing you need to know about me that makes actually a lot of what you've experienced over the last 10 months. And yes, it has been 10 months. Perhaps a little more understandable. And it is this very simple fact. The first woman I ever dated on a regular basis, I married. And we have been approaching 30 years together. Now, of course, this came as a huge shock to me, especially 30 years ago. You see, I never thought I was really built for the marriage thing or the serial relationship with the same person thing. I thought I would happily live my life flitting around, seeing the world with lots and lots of different and interesting people. But it turns out that that's not how God made me. Who knew? For those of you who have been married longer than me, I really could use some help, too, going forward, so don't leave in a hurry. Because I got no clue what I'm doing. But those of you maybe who also have found yourself in a similar situation of being married to the same person for a while, and that's anything longer than 2 months. Did you ever have this conversation where one of you looks at the other and says, "Well, should we have children?" Now, Chris asked me that question. That was my first heart surgery, by the way. Because if you thought I was woefully unprepared for marriage, you should have seen when the parenthood question came up. So I said, well, I was good with 1 kid. And she said, I was thinking 3. Again, after CPR and being revived, we had a conversation. And finally, I settled on this. I said, okay, here's the deal. I will give you 2 pregnancies. As many kids as you can get out of that, you go for it. To which point she said, you're laboring under the impression that I actually need you for the 3rd child. However, after our 2nd child, she did look at me and say, perhaps you were right. So Chris and I began to do this parenting thing. And so we did, how parents do. Well, are we ready for parenting? So we said to ourselves, well, should we have kids? And first thing we thought of, can we afford it? Now, my father used to say, for example, that my brother and I made my father a millionaire. But he also added, of course, I started with $1 billion. So we realized we really didn't have enough money to raise 1 child or 2 children. So, of course, we had children. Now, the jury is still out whether we're any good at this parenting thing, but at the end of the month, one turns 25 and one turns 23. So, again, those of you whose children are older and have advice going forward, please meet me in the narthex. But what is so interesting, of course, about my understanding of being a husband for almost now 30 years or being a parent for almost 25 is that when I was younger, I had no idea that these were the kinds of vocations to which God was calling me. Oh, I knew pretty well that I was going to be called as a teacher, although after having heard Sal read from the book of James, I'm now thinking of selling cars. But I also had an understanding pretty much of how I wanted to think about myself and what I thought I was about. But about being married or having kids, not too much thought. And yet, having been called to the vocation of marriage, or having been called to the vocation of parenthood, I got to tell you, it's as good today as they were 25 or 30 years ago. And I got to admit, I don't know any more than I did then. And I'm not nearly as young as I used to be. And apparently now this thing happens where your children have children and you become a grandparent. Complete mystery to me, all right? Except the only benefit that I can see so far is when I get tired, I can send the grandkid home. I tried that with my own kids, but eventually the neighbors said, no, you're home, not ours. So today, Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. And of course, for so many of us, we seem to think that that's some kind of onerous burden. That's something that we have to suffer through. But indeed, all he is saying is to pick up the life that God has given you and to live it following me. That whatever gifts God has given you to be able to share with the people who sit around you, with the world that lives around you, this is what Jesus is inviting you to share on this day. Because no matter which cross you pick up, it will lead to his cross. The cross of power and regeneration. The cross of love and hope. Because you see, no matter how you live your life, the future for all of us is the same. And I don't want to spoil anybody's ending, but you will die. And no matter which cross you choose to pick up or which cross you choose to ignore, no matter how you decide to live your life, you cannot avoid the inescapable reality that all of us face. And so picking up your cross and following Jesus is not picking up something that you hate or something that you don't like, but rather enjoying and understanding the gifts that you have received. And these 17 banners that adorn our worship area today are not signs of something that goes above and beyond the call of what we are doing with our lives, but are precisely the activities that are our lives. The lives that continually make the world that God is creating a trustworthy world where children and youth can be raised, where mission and evangelism can happen, where money can be spent in places where it is needed, where men and women can continually bind together at the table of our Lord to be able to live as the people of God in this place, in this world. To pick up your cross is to take responsibility for the life that God has given you and to live it in a manner of hope and love and trust that Jesus will not let you down. To be able to walk through those doors and to share a message of hope and love to a world that so desperately, desperately needs it. We at First Lutheran even have a group of people who are willing to help you. You know, you may be sitting there this morning looking at all these things saying, I don't know which one fits me, and in fact, none of them fit me. I need an 18th banner. Well, we have a group called Faith Builders. Their sign-up sheet is right out there as you walk out the door, and they will spend time helping you to figure out the vocation to which God has called you at this time in your life. Maybe you knew what your vocation was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever, and now you wonder, what is my vocation now, God? What do you need from me now? One of the most enduring phone calls I have of my father was when I called him up one New Year's Eve to wish him a happy new year from the great state of Texas where I lived while he still lived in Minnesota. And he said, Scott, thank you. He said, but what do I do now? I said, well, keep writing checks. He said, oh, that I could do. The vocations may change. The relationships may change. But we live with a God who continually empowers us through the waters of baptism and through the body and blood of Holy Communion, empowers us to live lives filled with hope, to be able to carry our crosses through those doors and out into the streets and into the world so that the mission of God's mercy and love can be shared. And none of us are outside the vocational purview of our God. We live built on that solid love and trust. The rock of both bread and wine and water that allows us to stand tall and to take our vocations, whatever they may be. Personal ones, such as parent or grandparent, husband or wife. Ones that have to do with making the world run, like teachers or nurses. Ones that have to do with making the world safe, like friends and lovers. These are the vocations to which God has asked us, so that when we pick up our cross and follow Jesus Christ, we are not being led down paths of which there is no ending, but rather we are being led down streets of promise, streets of grace, streets of hope, so that we all may walk together and follow the one cross, the cross upon which all of us are built. Amen.